moments when you're reading the scriptures and you come across a passage that stops you dead in your tracks. This happened to me not long ago when I was reading about King Asa in 1 Kings 15. Now, King Asa was a king of the southern kingdom of Judah, and following the death of Solomon, the kingdom divides, and the first king in the south is a guy by the name of Rehoboam. Then you have Abijah, and then you have Asa. And Rehoboam and Abijah did what was wrong, or did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. But King Asa was different. Notice what is said of him here in 1 Kings 15, verses 11 and following. It says, Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his ancestors had made. I mean, talk about a messed up situation, and he is cleaning house. And it continues. He even deposed his grandmother, Maacah, from her position as queen mother because she had made a repulsive image for the worship of Asherah. Asa cut it down and burned it in the Kidron Valley. And then notice this next verse. But he did not remove the high places, yet Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. This is the one that stopped me dead in my tracks. Now, to better understand what's going on here, we need to understand what these high places are that are being referenced. High places were these open-air cultic places that people would go to in order to worship gods or goddesses. Now, sometimes it could be more of a temple structure, but more often than that, it was an open-air sanctuary that typically had an altar for sacrifices, for the burning of incense, for grain offerings, for people to gather together. Oftentimes there were maybe rooms where people would have cultic meals, but it was a pagan area that was dedicated to the worship of a deity. And as the name implies, it could be in a high place, meaning like on the top of a mountain or on the top of a high hill, because oftentimes people worship deities in high locations because you are ascending closer to the deity. But other times, a high place could just mean like a high place of importance. And so you could have a sanctuary within your town or your village, and that would serve as a high place. Now, let me show you a couple of examples of high places that have been found in both Israel, and then I want to show you one in Jordan. So we're going to begin here in the very northern part of the country in Dan. And in the city, you have this structure that was constructed by Jeroboam, who was the very first king in the north, because he was trying to keep his people in the north from going to Jerusalem because that was the only place where you could worship God. So he set up two sanctuaries or two high places, one in Dan and the other in Bethel, which was the southern part of his kingdom. And it was an area that people came to in order to, well, in this case, worship God, but it was idolatrous because God said you can only worship me in Jerusalem. And Jeroboam set up a golden calf here in this structure where people came to this quote-unquote high place. Further south in Shechem, which is Samaria, there was an archaeological excavation done in the 1980s, that found a structure on top of Mount Ebal. Now, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, which is where the blessings and curses were shouted from when the people came into the land, and atop of Mount Ebal, there is a debate, by the way, archaeologically, as to is this a high place or is this something else, but the evidence is leaning stronger in the direction of it being a high place. But you can see this is the altar structure, and it's huge. You can see these people here in this image. We go further south to Arad, which is about 35 miles south of Jerusalem, and within a fortress, a very small fortress, we have a temple-like structure that is considered to be a high place. Now, whether people were worshiping God here or not, or maybe worshiping God and some other gods in a synchronistic kind of place, we don't know for certain, but this is again idolatrous because you could only worship God in in Jerusalem. And then let me just show you one more, because this is actually a full-blown pagan high place. In Petra, this is the capital of the Nabatean Empire, and if you go to Petra today, you kind of journey through the entrance, which is more than 3/4 of a mile long, called the Seek, and you come to the treasury, which is this really famous burial tomb area facade, and then you can journey a little further, and it says, hey, you can make the trek up to the high place of sacrifice, and you climb all of these steps, and you arrive at this high place of sacrifice. And this is pagan through and through. And we hear about these high places all throughout the Older Testament, but we begin reading about it here in Numbers 33, 51 to 52. God is speaking to Moses on the east side of the Jordan River, and he says this, "Speak to the Israelites, Moses, and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places." Like, God is not being lenient here. He is saying, I want you to demolish the high places. God goes, they're going to lead you astray. And what we see is that Israel will struggle with these high places throughout their time that we have recorded in the Older Testament. I mean, Solomon set up high places. Other kings did this as well. And so we've got, again, this tension that we're invited into in 1 Kings 15:14, where we've seen that Asa has ruled for 41 years. He's been, cleaning house, but he did not remove the high places. Yet, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. He was fully committed, but he had this high place that he didn't get rid of. He didn't demolish the high places. And the reason why this caused me to be stopped in my tracks is, one, because there's a great tension we can see in the text, but even more so is that I asked myself, is this true of me as well? Like, if somebody was looking on my life, on the one hand, they would say, yeah, he is fully committed to the Lord his God, but there are some high places. And it just caused me to pause and go, dear God, are there any high places in my life? Because there have been in my past that have been dealt with, and I don't ever want this to be said about me in the future. And it also causes me to pause right now and go, God, are there any high places in my life? Because high places is a metaphor for those things that have taken a preeminence in our lives that are not supposed to have that kind of importance. They've become an idol, if you will. And idols can be very challenging because it might be something good that we have just put on a high pedestal and have made something good into an idol. I mean, you think about money or wealth. Like, used well and appropriately, money is a good thing, but it can easily become an idol. It could also be something that is just not good for us that we just have in our lives. You think about this in terms of, an addiction, and, maybe it's something to do with alcohol or porn or opioids, or, even something along the lines of, like, we are totally addicted to buying things. And so our wealth or our possessions have become an idol. And so it just causes us to pause for a moment and go, okay, are there any idols in my life? And so as I've been thinking about this, three things kind of came to mind as almost like words of warning, words of caution about how high places begin to be erected in our lives, where they get built or when they get built. And so I just want to offer this up to you. This is something that I have seen in my journey. It's also things I've seen in others' journey. And so may we learn from both. And the first is this: high places often accompany high achievements. That when you are successful, when you have achieved something significant, we often justify a high place in our life. Let me give you an example. Not long ago, I was talking to a counselor who works with big name leaders and pastors who have fallen from grace. They had a high place, they got found out, and they fell from their high place, if you will. And this counselor works with them in order for them to deal with the junk they never dealt with and to begin a restoration process. And in having a conversation with this counselor, I just say, hey, what do you see? What's a common thing among these folks who are incredibly talented, who have had huge leadership, roles? What happens? Like, why are they falling? And it was really interesting because he said this. He said, when people are really successful, they look at all the things that they have accomplished, everything that they have achieved, and they go, look at all that has been done, that I have been part of. I can have this little thing over here in the corner. And it's a high place. It's an affair. It's an addiction. It's, something to do with embezzling money. It can be a number of things. And they justify that it's okay because they say, well, it's just a little thing, and look at all of the great things that I have done. Friends, that is a dangerous time that we need to be on our guard against. So there's one observation. Here's another observation. High places are often built in times of busyness. Because here's what happens. We get so busy doing things that we don't even recognize that we may be developing unhealthy habits, or we may become someone we don't want to be. It could be that in our busyness, that we have a lot of stress associated with what we're doing or with our job. And so we start looking for coping mechanisms. Or we're moving so fast throughout our day that we need something to help us unwind at the end of the day. And so slowly, we begin to make these little decisions that become habitual over time. And those habitual items become high places in our lives. In times of busyness, high places can be built. And just as high places are often built in times of busyness, the same is true in times of boredom. You start to get a sense that, there's just nothing to do and we're used to being entertained. And so we start looking for things that are exciting, that will entertain us. And all of a sudden, because we have all of this time and space, we start engaging in certain things. And because we have the time to do so, again, like in the times of busyness, we make these small decisions over time and something becomes a high place. And you think about this in terms of this pandemic we are in. Right? It is a time of boredom for some of us. For some of you, your states are getting back to normal. For some of you, the states have kind of reverted back to these restrictions, and you're finding yourself at home again with more time on your screen, more time to do different things. And all of a sudden, you recognize that, man, prior to this pandemic, this thing wasn't in my life, but during this pandemic with the extra time and boredom that I've had, I've engaged into this thing, and now it has become something that is in my life that God doesn't want as a central feature, or maybe even in my life at all. And so, friends, we are called to demolish the high places. And for us just to take a few moments and go, are there any high places in our lives? In addition to the things that I've offered, maybe it is pride, and arrogance. Maybe for some, it's just this massive ego. There's somebody that I know who is extremely well known, has done amazing things in the world, and I would say amazing things for God. And yet, when the limelight is not on them, when the spotlight isn't there, they are an absolute jerk to other people. And the vast majority of people have no idea who this person really is. And I look on their life and I go, man, there are moments where I've been like that, and I don't ever want to be like that again. And so we're called to demolish these high places. And I know that as we think about this in our lives, we may know the high places that are there. we may actually not know that we have built a high place. And so here's one of the things I just want to suggest you do sometime in the next week is go to the person who knows and loves you the best and just ask them, is there anything in my life that you see that you think is not what God would want? Whether you think I see it or not, and just see what they say. Because friends, I know that for me personally, I never want it to be said that Brad's heart was fully committed to the Lord, but there were high places in his life that he never demolished. And I know that you don't want this said about you as well. So if there are any high places in our lives, may we demolish those high places for the sake of our own soul, for the sake of our family and friends, for the sake of those that we're in relationship with and lead, because God wants us fully committed to Him and no high places. So friends, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. If you just know someone who may need to hear this, or you think just the series as a whole, the teaching series, would bless them, just share it with them. Again, thanks so much for stopping by. Thanks for listening, and may you walk out the text well in your life.